David Hogg is slamming the Democratic Party for alienating young men. His remarks may have won over comedian Bill Maher.
The often provocative DNC chair was on Maher's show over the weekend, explaining why he thought Democrats lost in November and challenging the party to change course. Let's watch.
We've created a culture where we say, well, if you say the wrong thing, you're excommunicated. And that's just not how human beings work. Nobody is perfect, but ultimately what we have to do here is figure out how to bring people back in and work towards the bigger goal of advancing the future of this country and helping young people especially get by so that they're able to focus on their lives and, getting with a young woman or something like that instead of how are they going to pay their rent, for example, or how are they working their 2 jobs. Young people should be able to focus on what young people should be focused on, which is how to get laid and how to go and have fun.
David Hogg for president, ladies and gentlemen.
Maher clearly liked what he heard, as you saw there. He capped off the interview by clapping, standing up and shaking Hogg's hand.
Meanwhile, Maher also torched Democrats for listening to young voters and embracing radical ideas. He says the party went from men can have babies to we like the terrorists.
So much to discuss here, Robby.
So much to discuss. I appreciate that David Hogg prepared a sales pitch for Bill Maher that was very up Bill Maher's alley, and it worked because he got applause and a handshake.
Right.
It's you'll probably feel this way too. He's like saying, on one hand, this is a difficult line to walk because clearly the Democratic Party alienating young people, particularly young men of all racial categories, is a major issue and has to do with how cultural elites, progressive, speak to young people, speak in general. There's something off-putting and hectoring about it. I don't think we really disagree there. At the same time, though, then Maher will be like, but don't listen to young people in terms of their radical economic agenda, which I also agree with, but there's kind of a discordant thing there.
Oh, 100%. I mean, look, there is at the core of what Hogg said a legitimate point, and you and I have discussed this before. Democrats, and Kamala Harris particularly, did not do well with young men. According to the most comprehensive voter survey, President Biden back in 2020 had carried men under 45 by 7 points. Last November, Trump carried them by 8 points. That's an appreciable swing in Trump's direction. That's obviously a problem for Democrats. David Hogg's making an argument about censoriousness, I think, and the idea that if you say the wrong thing, you'll be excommunicated. That, I think, is a valid point. I do think that sometimes there has been a degree of sort of almost puritanism entering the liberal circles in terms of how you can speak about certain issues. Now, then you look at the other side, which is, the Republican views on abortion or drag shows or book bans. I mean, those are pretty censorious views. The bigger problem I have, and I want to let you get in first, Maher went on to lambaste young people not only for their economic radicalism, but for their views on the Middle East and on the Palestinians in particular, which I've got much to say about, but why don't you get back in first?
On that subject, Maher's a little bit even to my right.
Right.
And we're going to talk more about the Middle East a little bit later on the show. Probably some people watching are like, what are you talking about, the puritanism of the Democratic Party? But I know exactly what they're getting at because Maher has long criticized some of these things I've talked about with respect to college campuses and sexual misconduct adjudication that did spill out into the broader culture as a result of Me Too, where there were a lot of young people, there were also a lot of really crude and awful and abusive, large executives and big, important, powerful people who were correctly held to account. There were also a lot of young people who just said the wrong thing or did the wrong thing. And what happened to Aziz Ansari, who's a famous person, but that whole write-up on his date gone wrong that was like, it was the poster child to me for Me Too overreach. Like, why are we having to confront what was just a awkward but normal bad date experience for someone being treated like he's Harvey Weinstein.
That was the one where the woman expressed concern because he had the wrong kind of wine or something.
Yeah, it was nuts.
Peculiar one.
It was and it was not published by a reputable outlet. It was published by Babe.net. Well, sorry to speak poorly of Babe.net. That kind of thing is what I'm sure David Hogg is talking about, and Bill Maher is talking about, and the not so much the Democratic Party, but progressive cultural tastemakers are associated with that vibe, and it is that vibe more than anything that I think has lost them so many young men.
Well, that may be true. I think that there is something off-putting about that, and I think we see the consequences of that point. In relation to Bill Maher,
Yes.
he has the capacity on topics like that to exhibit real critical thinking and some kind of rigorous analysis, and that is often missing on the Liberal side. It's often missing, I would argue, on the Conservative side about Republican beliefs. But what I find very difficult to get past with Maher is that when it comes to Israel and the Palestinians, that critical thinking seems to completely desert him in favour of a reflexive, extreme pro-Israel position that doesn't even seem to grasp why young people in particular are critical of a campaign that has killed more than 50,000 people. And he talks, I mean, in the show, the same episode of the show as Hogg was on, he was arguing that their young people, by which he means Democrats, now don't like their own civilization. They like the wrong one, suggesting sympathy toward Hamas. There's all sorts of things where he just doesn't countenance the idea that there are principled, reasonable, I would say, compelling reasons to be outraged at what is happening in that part of the world.
Yeah, this is sort of getting into a subject I've wanted to do a full segment on, probably with a guest, maybe frankly with a guest on both sides. This whole, have you heard of the woke right discourse that's taking place? Are you familiar with this term? Oh. It's very confusing. I was talking about it actually with Emily Jashinsky, who used to co-host with us. She has a show on Unheard, and we were talking about a variety of things, but eventually became a subject about the woke right. This is a description that a couple people, including James Lindsay, who's very active on social media, he's kind of an arch-libertarian of my views, is trying to assert that other people who you probably don't agree with and don't like very much, for the most part, are the woke right. It's like Tim Pool is the woke right, or some of the guests that have appeared on Joe Rogan are the woke right. Like he's taking the Douglas Murray side of this argument, and I largely agree with him on a lot of issues, but specifically on the Douglas Murray versus Dave Smith thing, even though I like and I'm friendly with Douglas Murray and I agree with a lot of what he does, I am more on the Dave Smith of that side of that particular conflict, because for just the reasons you outlined, I think you should be independent-minded about what is happening with Israel and Gaza. And is it just so then it's reducible to, okay, by woke right, do you just mean people who have a different view of Israel than you do? Because I do think there is something to talk about in the strategies being adopted by some of the people on the right to fight, like Stephen Miller, to wield power. And I'm the one saying, don't use the ring, Boromir. We got to destroy the ring. We can't use it to vanquish Sauron. We'll become just like it. And so I agree with James Lindsay about that. But then it gets a little bit lost in the weeds when we start talking about foreign policy, which is where I do want to see something different and iconoclastic. So I'd like to hash these discussions out with a representative of both sides of this argument.
Yeah, I mean,
we'll track them down.
I mean, I just think that in the Israel-Gaza situation, there is just inexplicable support for a egregious campaign of starvation and, frankly, slaughter, and how it is supported so vigorously as a conservative position, or why the United States should be underwriting that campaign financially and diplomatically, is a complete mystery to me. And I don't think it relies, it may be the case that more people on the left are broadly pro-Palestinian, but I don't think you have to be of the left to see the problems with it.
Well, fair enough, but that does go both ways, because there's basically ironclad support for Israel in the Democratic Party, and is some dissent and debate taking. I mean, certainly on the left, but also on the right about our funding commitment to Israel. I mean, to represent the other side, I would say, well, they were attacked by a terrorist group. Horrible things happen in war. This is war between a nation state and a terrorist group on its borders, and it's really ugly, but this, we were prepared to nuke every city in Japan until they surrendered. When they surrender, there'll be no more violence. Now, do we have to be, that's the moral reason for what they're doing. I would still say, even if that was the case, why does it need to be the U.S.'s issue? Are we empowering it to go further than it would otherwise because we're subsidizing it?
We're empowering blatant war crimes, in my opinion.
All right. Up next, we will talk about Qatar's grand gesture towards President Trump. Stay tuned.